George didn't even try to be gentle. He grabbed Carla's left hand and twisted the engagement ring off her finger so violently that she felt the skin burn. The diamond clattered onto the marble floor of the altar, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "I can't do this," George said, his voice steady and cold. He snatched the microphone from the priest's trembling hands, and the feedback shrieked through the packed church, making 300 guests wince in unison. "I'm calling off this wedding," George announced, his words landing like blows. "I don't love Carla. I never did. This whole thing was a mistake." The air left the room. Carla stood frozen in her white lace gown, her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands. Her mind went blank. Around her, she could hear the collective intake of breath, the rustle of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, the quiet click of phone cameras turning toward her like vultures circling prey. George dropped the microphone. It hit the altar steps with a dull thud. Without another word, he turned and walked down the aisle, his footsteps echoing in the horrified silence. Carla's legs moved before her brain caught up. She was running after him, tears streaming down her face, her vision blurred. She had to stop him. She had to fix this. She had to make him understand. She was almost to the church doors when a hand closed around her wrist. "Stop," a low voice said. Firm, absolute. Carla whirled around, yanking against the grip, but the man holding her didn't budge. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark navy suit that looked like it cost more than her wedding dress. His black hair was styled perfectly, but what made her breath catch was the tattoo crawling up the side of his neck, dark ink disappearing beneath his crisp white collar like a warning. "Let me go," Carla choked out, her voice breaking. "I have to. I need to." "No," the man said, and his voice was so calm, so certain, that it cut through the panic drowning her. "You don't need to chase a man who just destroyed you in front of everyone you know. You don't need to beg him to love you. You need to let him walk out that door." "Who are you?" Carla demanded, hysteria rising in her throat. "Why are you—" But the man had already released her wrist. He stepped past her, moving with a quiet, controlled power that made the crowd lean back without even realizing it. He walked down the aisle toward the altar, and Carla found herself following him, pulled along by something she couldn't name. He climbed the steps to the altar. The priest, still clutching his Bible like a life raft, took a step backward, his face pale. The man stood exactly where George had been standing moments before, and then he turned to face Carla. He extended his hand, palm up, an offering. "Come here," he said quietly. Carla's mind screamed that this was insane. She didn't know this man. She didn't know why he was doing this, but her feet moved anyway, carrying her up the steps until she was standing in front of him, her hand sliding into his. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, and when his fingers closed around hers, she felt an unexpected steadiness anchor her to the moment. He turned to face the congregation, keeping her hand firmly in his. When he spoke, his voice carried effortlessly through the church, low and commanding. "I will take her instead," he said. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. No one breathed. The entire church seemed suspended in disbelief. And then the doors at the back burst open. George came storming back in, his face red, his eyes wild. He pointed a shaking finger at the altar. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "Who the hell are you?" The man beside Carla didn't even glance in George's direction. He kept his eyes locked on the priest, who looked like he might faint. "You have a ceremony to perform," the man said, his tone polite but laced with steel. "Perform it." George started down the aisle, his fists clenched. "You can't do this. She's my fiancé. We were supposed to." Finally, the man turned to look at George, and George stopped mid-stride. It wasn't anger on the man's face. It wasn't even aggression. It was something colder, something that suggested crossing him would be the last mistake George ever made. "You pulled the ring off her finger," the man said, each word measured and deliberate. "You told 300 people you didn't want her. You walked away. You made your choice." His eyes narrowed, dark and unwavering. "Now I'm making mine." George's face drained of color. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The man took one step forward, positioning himself between Carla and George like an unbreakable wall. "Leave," the man said quietly. "Now." George's hands dropped to his sides. Something flickered across his face. Fear, maybe, or recognition of something dangerous he didn't want to name. He looked at Carla one last time, then turned and walked back up the aisle. This time, He didn't stop. The doors slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed through the church like a final verdict. The man turned back to Carla. His expression softened, just slightly. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumb, and the tenderness of the gesture made her breath hitch. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. Carla stared at him. She should say no. She should tell him that none of this made sense, that her world had just shattered, that a stranger was standing at her altar and she had no idea why. But what came out was a whisper. "Who are you?" "Kim Min-ho," he said, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "And if you'll let me, I will marry you right now." "Why?" The word barely made it past her lips. "Because you deserve better than what just happened," Min-ho said simply. "Because no one should stand at this altar alone. And because I can give you a way out of this that doesn't end with you being the woman everyone pities." Fresh tears slid down Carla's cheeks, but these felt different. Less like grief, more like something she couldn't name yet. She looked at this stranger, this man with the ink on his neck, and the certainty in his eyes, and she made a choice. Maybe it was reckless. Maybe it was insane. But it was hers. "Okay," she whispered. Min-ho's hand tightened around hers, and he turned to the priest. "Proceed." The priest's face went white. I don't know if I can do this," he stammered, his voice shaking. "This is highly irregular. I don't even know who you are. There are laws, licenses, procedures." Min-ho reached into his jacket with his free hand and pulled out a folded envelope. He handed it to the priest, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a marriage license, already completed, already signed. The priest's eyes went wide. He looked up at Min-ho, his expression shifting from confusion to something that looked almost like terror. "How did you—" the priest started. "Everything you need is there," Min-ho said, his voice smooth and final. "Everything is legal. Everything is in order. All you have to do is perform the ceremony. Welcome to Afro Soul Storybook. And darling, you just crossed a threshold you can't uncross. This isn't some fairy tale romance where the prince saves the princess. This is blood and power wrapped in Armani suits. This is a legacy stolen and a woman ready to burn the world to take it back. Subscribe to watch more of our daily stories. And comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far this storm is spreading, and hit that like button." The priest's hands shook as he stared at the marriage license. His eyes darted between the official seal, the signatures, and Min-ho's face. Whatever he saw in Min-ho's expression made him swallow hard and nod. Yes. Of course," the priest stammered. He cleared his throat and looked out at the congregation, most of whom still had their phones raised, recording every second of this spectacle. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed with the ceremony." A ripple of shocked whispers spread through the pews. Carla's mother stood up in the front row, her face pale, her mouth opening to protest. But Min-ho's gaze shifted to her for just a moment, and she sank back down into her seat without saying a word. The priest opened his Bible with trembling fingers. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice unsteady, "we are gathered here today." "Skip to the vows," Min-ho said quietly. The priest blinked. "But the readings, the homily." "Skip, to the vows." The priest flipped several pages ahead, his face growing paler with each passing second. "Do you, Kim Min-ho, take Carla Jacobs to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Min-ho's eyes never left Carla's. "I do." The priest turned to Carla, and she could see the question in his eyes, a silent plea asking if she was sure about this, if she understood what she was doing. But Carla couldn't think that far ahead. All she knew was that staying here, standing at this altar alone, while everyone watched her crumble, was worse than whatever came next. "Do you, Carla Jacobs, take Kim Min-ho to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Carla's voice came out as a whisper. "I do." "The rings," the priest said, looking around helplessly. Min-ho reached into his other pocket and produced a simple platinum band. It wasn't the ornate diamond-studded ring George had chosen, the one that was probably still lying somewhere on the altar floor. This was understated, elegant, and clearly expensive. He slid it onto Carla's finger, and it fit perfectly. The priest's voice had steadied slightly, as if he'd resigned himself to the insanity of the situation. "By the power vested in me by the state and the church, I now pronounce you husband and wife." He paused, looking at Minho uncertainly. You may kiss the bride." Minho leaned in slowly, giving Carla time to pull away if she wanted to, but she didn't. His lips brushed against hers, soft and brief, and when he pulled back, his hand came up to cup her face. The gesture was so tender, so protective, that for a moment Carla forgot that 300 people were watching them, that cameras were recording, that her entire world had just been turned upside down. "Trust me," Minho whispered against her ear, so quietly that only she could hear. "Just for today. Trust me." Before Carla could respond, Minho turned and began walking back down the aisle, keeping her hand firmly in his. The guests parted like water, shrinking back into their pews as Minho passed. Carla's bouquet of white roses was still clutched in her free hand, and she held onto it like an anchor to reality. They were halfway to the doors when they burst open again. George stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 of his groomsmen. His face was no longer red with anger, it had gone completely white, but his eyes were wild, desperate. "Carla, wait," George said, his voice cracking. "Please, I made a mistake. I didn't mean—" Minho stopped walking. The entire church fell silent. "You had your chance to speak," Minho said, his voice so cold that the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "You chose to humiliate her. You chose to walk away. Those were your decisions." He took a single step toward George, and both groomsmen immediately stepped backward, leaving George standing alone. "Now live with them. I love her," George said, and Carla felt something twist in her chest. "I was scared. I panicked. But I love her, and you can't just— You don't love her," Minho interrupted, and there was something in his tone that made it sound like an absolute truth rather than an opinion. "You love the idea of her. You love the wedding, the attention, the performance, but you don't love her. If you did, you would never have done what you just did." George opened his mouth to argue, but Minho took another step forward, and whatever George saw in his face made the words die in his throat. The tattoo on Minho's neck seemed darker somehow, more prominent, like a brand that marked him as someone you didn't challenge. "If you ever approach her again," Minho said quietly, each word deliberate and final, "if you ever contact her, if you ever even think about her, I will make sure you regret it for the rest of your life. Do you understand me?" It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. George's face went from white to gray. He looked at Carla, and she saw genuine fear in his eyes for the first time since she'd met him. "Carla, please. She's my wife now," Minho said. "Not your concern. Not your business. Not your anything." He turned slightly, positioning himself so that George couldn't even see Carla anymore. "Leave. Don't make me tell you again." George stood frozen for another heartbeat, and then he turned and ran. His groomsmen followed, their footsteps echoing through the church. This time, when the doors slammed shut, Carla knew he wouldn't be coming back. Minho turned back to her, his expression softening again. "Are you ready to leave?" Carla nodded, because she didn't trust her voice. Minho led her out of the church and into the blinding afternoon sunlight. The church steps were crowded with guests who had spilled out to watch, and beyond them, Carla could see news vans pulling up, cameras being assembled, reporters shouting questions. Someone must have tipped off the media. Of course they had. This was too good a story to keep quiet. "Mrs. Minho, Carla, what just happened in there? Is it true your groom abandoned you? Who was the man you married instead?" Minho didn't answer any of them. He simply guided Carla down the steps with one hand on the small of her back, his body positioned between her and the cameras. At the bottom of the steps, a sleek black car was waiting, a luxury sedan with tinted windows and diplomatic plates. A man in a dark suit opened the back door, and Minho helped Carla inside before sliding in beside her. The door closed, muffling the chaos outside. The driver pulled away from the curb smoothly, and within seconds they were speeding through the city streets, leaving the church and the reporters and Carla's old life far behind. Carla stared out the window, watching the familiar streets blur past. Her mind felt numb, overloaded. She was married, to a stranger who had just stood up to George with a quiet, lethal authority that suggested he was used to getting his way. A stranger who had a marriage license ready in his pocket, as if he'd been expecting this. "Where are we going?" Carla finally asked, her voice hoarse. "Somewhere safe," Minho said. He was watching her with those dark, intense eyes, like he was trying to read her thoughts. "Somewhere the media can't reach you. Somewhere you can breathe." The car turned onto a highway, heading toward the financial district where the city's skyscrapers clustered together like steel giants. They pulled up to one of the tallest buildings, a glass tower that seemed to pierce the sky. The driver stopped at a private entrance, and Minho helped Carla out of the car. She was still wearing her wedding dress, still holding her bouquet. She must have looked absurd. Minho guided her through a marble lobby and into a private elevator that required a keycard to operate. The doors closed, and the elevator began to rise, and rise, and rise. Carla watched the numbers climb 30, 40, 50, until finally they stopped at the penthouse level. The doors opened directly into an apartment that was bigger than Carla's childhood home. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city spread out below. The furniture was minimalist and expensive, all clean lines and dark wood and soft leather. Everything looked untouched, like a showroom. "This is your home now," Minho said, watching her take it in. "For as long as you need it to be." Carla set her bouquet down on a glass coffee table and turned to face him. The adrenaline that had been carrying her through the last hour was finally starting to fade, and reality was crashing down on her like a wave. "Who are you?" she asked again, because she needed to know. She needed to understand what she'd just gotten herself into. "And don't just tell me your name. Tell me who you are. Why you did this. Why you had a marriage license ready. Why George looked at you like he was staring at death." Minho was quiet for a long moment. He shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over the back of a chair. And Carla saw more of the tattoo, now intricate black ink that covered his shoulder and part of his upper arm, disappearing beneath his white dress shirt. It looked like a dragon, coiled and dangerous. "I'm not a good man, Carla," Minho finally said, his voice low. "I want you to understand that before we go any further." "Then what are you?" Minho met her eyes, and there was no apology in his gaze. "I run an organization that operates in the spaces between legal and illegal. Gambling, protection. Investments that most people don't ask too many questions about. Some people call it a syndicate. Others call it the Korean Mafia." He paused. Both are accurate. Carla felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "You're a criminal?" "I prefer to think of myself as a businessman with unconventional methods," Minho said calmly. "But yes, I operate outside the law when it suits me. And you just married me? Why? What do you get out of this?" Minho walked to the windows and looked out at the city. "I was at your wedding because I was doing business with one of your guests. I saw what George was planning to do, saw him rehearsing his little speech in the parking lot with his groomsmen. They thought it was funny." His jaw tightened. "I thought it was cowardly. So you decided to step in? Out of the goodness of your heart?" Carla's voice was rising now, panic and anger mixing together. "You had a marriage license ready. You can't tell me you did this on a whim." "I had the license prepared because I saw an opportunity," Minho admitted, turning back to face her. "Your family has connections. Your father worked in city planning before he died. Your mother sits on half a dozen charity boards. You know people, Carla. People who can be useful to someone like me." The truth hit her like a slap. "You married me for connections?" "I married you because you needed a way out and I needed legitimacy," Minho said bluntly. "A man like me with a respectable wife? It opens doors that would otherwise stay closed. It makes me look stable, trustworthy. It gives me access to circles I couldn't reach on my own." Carla felt something cold settle in her chest. "So I'm just, what? A prop? A business arrangement?" "Yes," Minho said, and at least he had the decency not to lie about it. "But I'm offering you something in return. Protection, security, a life where you don't have to be the woman George humiliated, where you don't have to face your friends and family as the bride who got left at the altar." He moved closer to her, his expression serious. "I can give you power, Carla. I can give you a life where no one will ever make you feel small again." "And what if I don't want that?" Carla whispered. "What if I just want to go home? Then I'll have the marriage annulled tomorrow," Minho said simply. "I won't force you to stay. But think about what going home means. Think about facing your mother, your friends, everyone who was at that church today. Think about the pity, the whispers, the way they'll look at you for the rest of your life as the girl who wasn't good enough." Carla closed her eyes, and she could already see it, her mother's disappointed face, her friends' awkward attempts at comfort, the endless questions, and the careful, patronizing sympathy. She could see herself becoming smaller and smaller under the weight of everyone's pity until there was nothing left of her. "How long?" she asked, opening her eyes. "How long? What? How long would this arrangement last? If I stayed?" Minho considered her question. "A year," long enough to establish legitimacy, long enough for the media to lose interest in your story, long enough for you to figure out who you want to be next. And after that, you're free to leave. I'll make sure you're financially secure. I'll make sure you have everything you need to start over however you want. Minho's expression softened slightly. I'm not a good man, Carla, but I keep my promises. Carla looked around the penthouse at the expensive furniture, the breathtaking view, the life of luxury and danger that Minho was offering her. It was insane. All of it. But going back to her old life, to the pity and the shame and the endless reminders of her humiliation, felt even worse. Okay, she finally said. 1 year. Minho nodded, and something that might have been approval flickered across his face. There are rules, he said. For your safety. You don't leave this building without security. You don't talk to reporters. You don't contact George or anyone from your old life without telling me first. And most importantly, he stepped closer, his voice dropping. You don't ask questions about my business, what I do, where I go, who I meet with. That world is dangerous, and the less you know about it, the safer you'll be. So, I'm a prisoner? You're protected, Minho corrected. There's a difference. Carla wanted to argue, but she was so tired, so overwhelmed. The weight of everything that had happened was finally crashing down on her, and she felt like she might collapse. I need to be alone, she whispered. Minho studied her for a moment, then nodded. Your bedroom is down that hall, second door on the right. Everything you need is already there. If you need anything else, there's a phone on the nightstand. Just pick it up and someone will help you. Carla walked down the hall in a daze, pushed open the second door, and found herself in a bedroom that was bigger than her entire apartment. There was a king-sized bed with pristine white linens, a walk-in closet that was already filled with clothes in her size, and a bathroom with a rainfall shower and a tub that could fit 3 people. She caught sight of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her wedding makeup was smudged, her carefully styled hair was coming loose, and her white dress was wrinkled from the car ride. She looked like a ghost of the bride she was supposed to be. Carla turned away from the mirror, walked to the bed, and collapsed onto it. The white roses from her bouquet had fallen somewhere along the way, and she was grateful. She didn't want to see them anymore. Didn't want to be reminded of the wedding that should have been. She was married to a stranger, a criminal, a man who had rescued her not out of kindness but out of calculated self-interest. And somehow, impossibly, that still felt better than the alternative. Carla closed her eyes and let herself cry, not for George, but for the life she'd thought she was going to have, the future that had been ripped away from her in front of 300 witnesses. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she lay there in her wedding dress, staring at the ceiling of her gilded cage, and wondered what the hell she was going to do next. Carla woke up 3 hours later to the sound of rain pattering against the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: George, the church, Minho, the marriage that wasn't supposed to be real. She sat up slowly, her wedding dress twisted around her legs. Someone had draped a soft blanket over her while she slept, and there was a glass of water on the nightstand that hadn't been there before. The small kindness made her throat tighten. Carla stood and walked to the closet, searching through the clothes that had been prepared for her. Everything was her size, her style elegant but understated. She found a pair of black leggings and an oversized cream sweater, changed out of the wedding dress, and left it in a heap on the floor. She never wanted to see it again. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Minho sitting at the dining table with a laptop open in front of him. He'd changed too, the navy suit replaced with dark jeans and a black t-shirt that showed the full extent of the dragon tattoo winding down his arm. He looked up as she approached. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "A little." Carla sat down across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. "I've been thinking. About leaving. About staying." She met his eyes. "You said you'd give me an annulment if I wanted one. Is that offer still on the table?" "Yes." "And if I stay? What happens then?" Minho closed his laptop and gave her his full attention. "Then we continue this arrangement. You live here. You appear with me at necessary events. You play the role of my wife in public. In return, you have security, financial support, and protection from anyone who tries to make you a victim of what happened today. And in private? In private, we maintain whatever boundaries you need," Minho said. "I won't touch you. I won't expect anything from you beyond the public appearances. This penthouse has 4 bedrooms. You can have your own space." It was a business transaction, plain and simple. No romance, no pretense of affection. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement between two people who needed something from each other. Carla thought about going home, thought about her mother's inevitable questions, the pitying looks from friends, the gossip that would follow her everywhere, thought about being defined forever as the woman George left at the altar. "I'll stay," she said. Something flickered in Minho's expression: approval, maybe, or relief. "For the full year?" "For the full year," Minho nodded. "Then we should address the immediate problem. Your mother has been calling." As if on cue, Carla's phone, which she'd left on the coffee table, started ringing. The screen showed her mother's contact photo, and Carla's stomach clenched. "I have to talk to her eventually," Carla said quietly. "Do you want privacy?" "No. Stay." Carla picked up the phone and answered. "Mom." "Carla Elizabeth Jacobs, what on earth were you thinking?" Her mother's voice was shrill, panicked. "Marrying a complete stranger? Running off without a word? I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I know. I'm sorry." "Sorry? Sorry? Carla, you don't even know this man. He could be dangerous, He is dangerous," Carla interrupted, and she saw Minho's eyebrow raise slightly. "And I married him anyway." Her mother made a choked sound. "Then come home. Right now. We'll fix this. We'll get the marriage annulled. And we'll—" "No." Silence. "What did you say?" her mother asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I said no, Mom. I'm not coming home. I'm not getting an annulment. I'm staying with my husband." The word felt strange on her tongue, but she forced herself to say it with confidence. "Carla, you're not thinking clearly. You're traumatized. You're in shock." "I'm thinking very clearly," Carla said, and she was surprised to find that it was true. "George humiliated me in front of everyone I know. He made me look like a fool, and if I come home now, if I let everyone see me as the victim he tried to make me, then he wins. I won't give him that. So you're staying with a stranger out of pride?" "I'm staying with my husband because it's my choice to make. Not yours. Not George's. Mine." Carla took a breath. "I love you, Mom, but this is my life, and I need you to respect my decision." Her mother was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost pleading. "Carla, sweetheart, I just want you to be safe. I am safe. Minho won't hurt me." Carla glanced at him as she said it, and he nodded once, a silent confirmation of the promise. "How can you possibly know that? Because if he wanted to hurt me, he's had plenty of opportunities already." Carla stood and walked to the windows, looking out at the rain-soaked city. "I know this seems crazy. I know you don't understand. But I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" Another long silence. Then, finally, her mother sighed. "I don't like this. I know, but you're an adult. And I suppose you have the right to make your own mistakes." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was better than Carla had expected. "Thank you. Just promise me you'll call regularly, so I know you're all right." "I promise." After a few more minutes of awkward conversation, Carla ended the call and set the phone down. Her hands were shaking slightly, but she felt lighter somehow, freer. "That went better than I expected," Minho said from behind her. Carla turned to face him. "She thinks I've lost my mind." "Have you?" "Probably." Carla managed a small smile, "But at least it's my choice to lose it." Minho stood and walked over to her. "There's something else you should know. George has been trying to contact you. Text messages, emails, phone calls. My people have been blocking them, but he's persistent." Carla's stomach twisted. "What does he want?" "To apologize, to beg for forgiveness, to convince you that marrying me was a mistake." Minho's expression hardened. "He doesn't understand that he lost his chance to have any say in your life the moment he walked away from that altar." "What are you going to do?" "What needs to be done?" Minho pulled out his phone and made a call. "Bring him to the usual place, now." He hung up and looked at Carla. "This won't take long." "Minho, what?" "Stay here," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "I'll handle this." Before Carla could protest, Minho was gone, the private elevator doors closing behind him. She stood alone in the penthouse, her heart racing, and wondered what handling it meant for a man like Minho. Minho returned 2 hours later. He didn't offer any details about where he'd been or what he'd done, and Carla didn't ask. But the next morning, when she finally worked up the courage to check her blocked messages, There was one final text from George. "I'm sorry. I won't bother you again." The messages stopped after that. The calls stopped. George disappeared from her life as completely as if he'd never existed. Carla didn't ask Minho what he'd said to make that happen. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. The first few weeks were strange. Carla and Minho circled each other like cautious strangers, polite but distant. He disappeared for hours at a time on business she wasn't allowed to ask about. She spent her days exploring the penthouse, reading, trying to figure out what to do with all the empty time. Minho kept his promise about boundaries. He never entered her bedroom without permission, never touched her casually. The only time he came close was when they had to appear in public together, charity galas, business dinners, carefully orchestrated photo opportunities designed to show the world that their marriage was real. At those events, Minho would place his hand on the small of her back, lean in to whisper in her ear, smile at her with a warmth that looked genuine, even though Carla knew it was all performance. And each time, Carla found herself leaning into the touch a little more, staying close to him a little longer than strictly necessary. The media ate it up. The story of the runaway groom and the mysterious Korean businessman who had swept in to save the abandoned bride became the scandal of the season. Some outlets painted Minho as a romantic hero. Others dug into his background and published thinly veiled speculation about his business interests. But no one could prove anything, and Minho seemed unconcerned by the attention. "Let them speculate," he told Carla one evening after a particularly invasive article had been published. "The truth is far more boring than what they imagine." "Is it?" Carla asked, and Minho smiled a real smile, not the polished version he wore in public. "Maybe not." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. Minho started eating breakfast with her instead of disappearing into his office. They began watching movies together in the evenings, arguing good-naturedly about plot holes and character motivations. Carla started leaving books she thought he'd enjoy on his desk, and Minho started bringing her coffee in the mornings exactly how she liked it. The boundaries they'd established began to blur. 6 months in, Carla woke up from a nightmare about the wedding, about George's face, as he tore the ring from her finger and found herself walking to Minho's room without thinking. She knocked softly, and when he opened the door, shirtless and concerned, she didn't explain. She just stepped into his space, and he pulled her into his arms without hesitation. They stood like that for a long time, Carla's face pressed against his chest, his hand stroking her hair. Neither of them acknowledged it the next morning, but something fundamental had shifted. 8 months in, Minho came home with a cut above his eye and bruised knuckles. Carla patched him up without asking questions, and when she was done, Minho caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not asking, for not judging, for just being here." Carla looked at him, at the tattoos and the scars and the dangerous intensity that never quite left his eyes, and realized with a jolt that she didn't want the year to end. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want this arrangement to stay professional and distant. She wanted him. 1 year and 2 days after their wedding, Carla woke to find Minho standing on the penthouse balcony, looking out at the city as the sun rose. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and joined him outside. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. "I was thinking," Minho said, about the fact that our arrangement is over. Technically, you're free to leave." Carla's heart clenched. "Do you want me to leave?" Minho turned to face her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. "No, but I want you to stay for the right reasons. Not because of our agreement, not because you're afraid of what people will say, but because you want to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, delicate, elegant, with a single diamond that caught the morning light. "This isn't the ring I gave you in the church," Minho said. "That was part of the arrangement. This one is real." He took her left hand and held the ring above her finger, not quite putting it on. "I'm asking you properly this time, Carla. Will you marry me? Not as a business arrangement, not to save face or gain connections, but because I love you, because this year with you has been the most honest, the most real thing in my life, because I want every morning to start with you and every night to end with you." Carla felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Your life is dangerous. Yes. Your work is illegal. Mostly yes. You're a terrible influence and a worse role model." Minho smiled. "Undoubtedly. And I love you anyway," Carla whispered. "I love you for defending me when no one else would, for giving me space to figure out who I wanted to be, for making me feel safe in a world that suddenly felt terrifying, for seeing me as strong instead of broken. She held out her hand. Yes, I'll marry you. Again, for real this time. Minho slid the ring onto her finger, and this time when he kissed her, there was nothing performative about it. It was raw and honest and full of all the things they'd been holding back for a year. When they finally pulled apart, Carla was breathless. So what now? She asked. Now we live, Minho said simply, messily, imperfectly, but together. Carla looked out at the city spread below them, the same city where George had tried to humiliate her, where the media had dissected her life, where she'd been forced to choose between pity and danger. She'd chosen danger, and it had led her here. To this balcony, this man, this strange and complicated love that shouldn't work but somehow did. Together, she agreed, and sealed it with another kiss as the sun rose over their beautifully messy life.